bring it about. In October 1836, Chopin met Baroness Aurora Dudevant, a writer who under the pen name of George Sand poured forth a steady stream of romantic novels, roughly akin to our silhouette romances. Sand, a bisexual, was an ardent individualist with a predilection for wearing men's clothing and smoking cigars. 6 years Chopin's senior, she became his lover and protector. Many of the composer's best works were written at Nohant, her summer residence 150 miles south of Paris. After their relationship ended in 1847, Chopin undertook a taxing concert tour of England and Scotland. While this improved his depleted finances, it weakened his delicate health. He died in Paris of tuberculosis at the age of 39. Figure 25, 2. Novelist Aurora Dudevant by Eugene Delacroix. Both the painter Delacroix and the composer Chopin often stayed at her summer estate in Nohant in the south of France. Copyright Superstock. Mazurka in B major, Opus 7, No. 1. Although Frédéric Chopin spent most of his adult life in France, he maintained strong emotional ties to Poland, and his compositions frequently drew upon musical idioms of his native land. Indeed, the expatriate composer became something of a national hero in Poland, his music embraced as a way of preserving a national heritage. Consciously, Chopin became an avatar of musical nationalism. As a youth, Chopin had vacationed with his family in the Polish countryside, where he was introduced to such traditional Polish dances as the mazurka and the polonaise. The mazurka is a fast dance in triple meter with an accent on the second beat. Its melody draws on native folk tunes, some of them of Jewish ancestry, and its harmony suggests the static droning of a village bagpipe. Chopin's mazurka in B major begins much like a triple meter waltz, except that the strong accent often falls on beat 2, not beat 1. Yet midway through, the mode switches from major to minor, a strange scale enters in the melody, and a drone appears in the accompanying bass. We have been transported from the world of the Parisian salon to a Polish village, from the familiar to the foreign. In Chopin's day, these mazurkas were experienced as music or as dance. The Parisians listened, the Poles danced. Chopin was a rarity among Romantic composers. He wrote only for the piano or ensemble pieces in which he made the piano figure prominently. His works for solo piano include, in addition to his mazurkas and polonaises, 3 piano sonatas, a set of 24 preludes, 24 etudes, and 21 nocturnes. Far better than the other genres for piano, the dreamlike nocturnes embody the essence of musical romanticism. Nocturne in C-sharp minor, Opus 27, No. 1. Want to hear music that is almost painfully beautiful? Download a Chopin nocturne. A nocturne is a slow, dreamy genre of piano music that came into favor in the 1820s and 1830s. It suggests moonlit nights, romantic longing, and a certain wistful melancholy, all evoked through bittersweet melodies and softly strumming harmonies. To set a nocturnal mood in his nocturne in C minor, Chopin begins with a tonic C minor chord spun out as an arpeggio in the bass, like a harp or guitar played in the moonlight. The melody enters in minor but immediately turns to major, by means of an added sharp. As the opening melody repeats again and again in the course of the work, so, too, the harmony shifts expressively, bending back and forth from minor to major, from dark to light. This twisting of mode is one way that the composer creates the bittersweet feeling. Download supplementary listening guides for several more Chopin works, including a polonaise, etude, and prelude, at the text website. Download supplementary listening guides for several more Chopin nocturnes at the text website. Example 25, 1. Soon the opening melody breaks off, and a more passionate, agitated mood takes hold. A new theme enters and the tempo increases. The bass now begins a long, mostly chromatic ascent. Here Chopin joins a long list of composers who have employed rising chromaticism to create a feeling of anxiety and growing tension. Example 25, 2. A climax is reached at the peak of this line, emphasized by a remarkable chord change, a chord with 4 sharps is immediately followed by one with 4 flats. As mentioned earlier, the sudden juxtaposition of such distant chords creates bold harmonic shifts of the sort favored by Romantic composers as they strove to fashion a new, more colorful harmonic language. Now a third melody enters, which eventually gives way to A by means of a descending, recitative-like passage. The return to A is especially rich and satisfying, as the harp-like accompaniment and plaintive melody seem to rise from the depths of the fading bass. Chopin's simple formal plan is now clear: statement, digression, return, each section with its own evocative atmosphere. The lyrical expressive gives way to the passionately anxious, which yields to the initial lyricism. The returning A is extended by means of an exquisite little coda. At the very end, a painful dissonance sounds and then resolves to consonance, as the fears of the nocturnal world dissolve into a heavenly major realm. As the German poet Heine said of Chopin, he hails from the land of Mozart, Raphael, and Goethe. His true home is in the realm of poetry. Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was not merely a musician, he was a phenomenon, perhaps the most flamboyant artistic personality of the entire 19th century. Handsome, supremely talented, and equally self-confident, he strutted across the stage as the musical sex symbol of the Romantic era. But he could also play the piano, and like no other. Franz Liszt was born in Hungary of German-speaking parents. In 1822, his ambitious father took him to Vienna and then Paris to be the next child prodigy, the latest musical wunderkind. But his father died suddenly, and the young pianist's career languished. Liszt's life took a dramatic turn on April 20, 1832, however, when he attended a concert given by the great violin virtuoso Niccolò Paganini. What a man, what a violin, what an artist! Oh, God, what pain and suffering, what torment in those 4 strings! Liszt vowed to bring Paganini's technical virtuosity to the piano. Practicing 4 to 5 hours a day, unusual dedication for a prodigy, he taught himself to play on the piano what had never been played before: tremolos, leaps, double trills, glissandos, and simultaneous octaves in both hands, all at breathtaking speed. When he returned to the stage for his own concerts, he overwhelmed the audience. He had become the greatest pianist of his time, and perhaps of all time. In 1833, Liszt's life took another unexpected turn. He met the Countess Marie d'Agoult, and decided to give up the life of the performing artist in exchange for domestic security. Although she was already married and the mother of 2 children, Marie and Liszt eloped, first to Switzerland and then to Italy. Residing in these countries for 4 years, the couple had 3 children of their own. Figure 25, 3. The young, charismatic Franz Liszt, the preeminent pianist of the Romantic era. Copyright Upperstock Superstock. Beginning in 1839, and continuing until 1847, Liszt once more took to the road as a touring virtuoso. He played more than 1,000 concerts, from Ireland to Turkey, from Sweden to Spain, from Portugal to Russia. Everywhere he went, the handsome pianist was greeted with the sort of mass hysteria today reserved for rock stars. Audiences of 3,000 crowded into the larger halls. Women tried to rip off his silk scarf and white gloves, and fought for a lock of his hair. Lisztomania swept across Europe. Despite their obvious sensationalism, Liszt's concerts in the 1840s established the format of our modern-day piano recital. He was the first to play entire programs from memory. He was the first to place the piano parallel with the line of the stage so that neither his back nor his full face, but rather his extraordinary side profile, was visible to the audience. He was the first to perform on the stage alone. Up to that point, concerts traditionally had included numerous performers on the program. These solo appearances were called first soliloquies, and then recitals, suggesting they were something akin to personal dramatic recitations. As Liszt modestly claimed in his adopted French, le concert, c'est moi. But Liszt was a complex man with many facets to his personality. He thought of himself not only as a showman pianist but also as a serious composer. So, in 1847, he suddenly quit the lucrative concert circuit and settled in Weimar, Germany, to serve the ducal court as music director and composer in residence. Here he concentrated on writing orchestral music. All told, he composed a dozen tone poems, as well as 2 program symphonies and 3 piano concertos. In 1861, Liszt again surprised the world. He moved to Rome, entered holy orders in the Roman Catholic Church, and took up residence in the Vatican. Abbé Liszt, as the composer now styled himself, had replaced Don Juan. While in Rome, Liszt wrote the bulk of his 60 religious works, including 2 oratorios. He died at the age of 75 in Bayreuth, Germany, where he had gone to hear the latest opera of his son-in-law, Richard Wagner. Figure 25, 4. Countess Marie d'Agoult in 1843. She was a novelist in her own right, and some of the tracks on music that appeared under Liszt's name were probably penned by her. Like many female writers of the day, including George Sand and George Eliot, she wrote under a masculine nom de plume, Daniel Stern. Bridgman Girardin Art Resource, New York. Despite Liszt's interest in religious music and programmatic works for orchestra, his reputation as a composer rests primarily upon his sensational piano music, particularly his Hungarian rhapsodies. Liszt had large hands and unusually long fingers with very little web-like connective tissue between them, which allowed him to make wide stretches with relative ease. He could play a melody in octaves when others could play only the single notes of the line. If others might execute a passage in octaves, Liszt could dash it off in more impressive-sounding tenths. So he wrote daredevil music full of virtuosic display. Figure 25, 5. Lisztomania, as depicted in 1842. A recital by Liszt was likely to create the sort of sensation that a concert by a rock star might generate today. Women fought for a lock of his hair, a broken string from his piano, or a shred of his velvet gloves. Copyright Lebrick Music and Arts. To build sufficient technique to tackle Liszt's difficult showpieces, performers practiced a musical genre called the étude. An étude is a short, one-movement composition designed to improve one or more aspects of a performer's technique. Before 1840, dozens of composers had published books of technical exercises that became the cornerstone of piano instruction for the burgeoning middle class. Chopin and Liszt took this development one step further. They added beautifully crafted melodies and unusual textures to what previously had been merely mind-numbing finger work, thereby demonstrating that an étude might embody artistry as well as mechanics. Liszt's most difficult pieces of this sort are his 12 transcendental études. As the title suggests, these works require transcendent, indeed superhuman, technical skill. Ironically, these études by Liszt are not useful studies for the average pianist. They are so difficult that the performer must already be a virtuoso to play them. As composer and critic, Robert Schumann said, "The transcendental études are studies in storm and dread designed to be performed by, at most, 10 or 12 players in the world." Download supplementary listening guides for several more Liszt selections at the text website. Transcendental Étude No. 8, Wild Jagged. Among the most technically difficult of Liszt's transcendental études is No. 8, Wild Jagged. The title suggests a nocturnal chase in a supernatural forest of the sort often evoked in German Romantic literature. The similarly supernatural demands placed on the pianist are intended to develop skill in playing broken octaves in the left hand and simultaneous chromatic runs in both hands. Occasionally, a lyrical melody shines forth in the dark forest of digital dangers. In these moments, the pianist must project the expressive melody while keeping the difficult accompaniment up to tempo, performing simultaneously the roles of poet and technical virtuoso. Today this étude serves as a musical Mount Everest. Dozens of young virtuosos can be seen on YouTube trying to scale it. Figure 25, 6. The aged Liszt, still dazzling audiences and destroying pianos. As a critic of the day said of his slash and burn technique, he is as much a piano slayer as a piano player. Mary Evans Picture Library. The Image Works. Example 25, 3. The materials on the text website will help you understand and pass tests on the content of this chapter. In addition, you may view active listening guides and other materials that will help you succeed in this course. Key words: sustaining pedal, soft pedal, cross-stringing, mazurka, nocturne, listomania, recital, etude. 26. Romantic opera, Italy. The 19th century is often called the Golden Age of Opera. It is the century of Rossini, Bellini, Verdi, Wagner, Bizet, and Puccini. True, there had been great opera composers before, Monteverdi, Handel, and Mozart, to name just three. But the 19th century saw the creation of much of the core repertoire of today. Presently, about two-thirds of the productions of the leading opera companies, the Metropolitan Opera in New York and La Scala in Milan, for example, are works created during the years 1820–1900. Italy, of course, is the home of opera. The Italian language, with its evenly spaced, open vowels, is perfectly suited for singing, and the people of Italy seem to have an innate love of melody. Beginning around 1600, the first operas were created in Florence, Rome, Venice, and Mantua. For nearly 2 centuries, Italian opera dominated the international stage. When Handel wrote operas for London in the 1720s, for example, he composed Italian operas, as did Mozart when he created musical theatre for the courts of Germany and Austria in the 1770s and 1780s. Figure 26, 1. The reigning opera diva Renée Fleming of Rochester, New York, specializes in bel canto opera. Kevin Mazur, Wire Image, Getty Images. In the early 19th century, the primacy of Italian opera was maintained almost single-handedly by Gioacchino Rossini. Surprising as it may seem today, Rossini was the most celebrated composer in Europe during the 1820s, far exceeding even Beethoven in fame. He owed this public favor in large measure to the genre he chose. Opera was then the most popular form of musical entertainment. More than the symphony, string quartet, or any other musical genre of the time, opera captured the popular imagination in much the way that cinema does today. Rossini brought to a glorious close the 18th-century tradition of comic opera, or opera buffa. Catchy, oft-repeating melodies, vivacious rhythms, and rollicking crescendos were his trademarks. His best-known comic opera, The Barber of Seville, has never disappeared from the operatic stage since it first appeared in 1816. Even casual music lovers know a little of this enduring work in the form of the Figaro, Figaro, Figaro call from the opening aria for the resourceful barber, Figaro. Rossini could also write in a more serious style, as exemplified in his last opera, William Tell. This stormy drama, too, has achieved a measure of immortality, the overture providing the theme music for the radio and film character of the Lone Ranger. Italian bel canto opera. Whereas German operatic composers would come to emphasize the dramatic power and instrumental color of the orchestra, Italians after Rossini increasingly focused their energies on melodies for the solo voice, on the art of beautiful singing, or bel canto. The two most gifted of the early creators of bel canto opera were Gaetano Donizetti and Vincenzo Bellini. In their works, the orchestra provides merely a simple harmonic support for the soaring, sometimes divinely beautiful, lines of the voice. Look at the opening of the famous aria, Casta Diva, from Bellini's Norma, in which the heroine sings a prayer to a distant moon goddess. Here the orchestra functions like a giant guitar. Simple chords are fleshed out as arpeggios by the strings while an even simpler bass line is plucked below. All of the musical interest is in the rapturous sound of the human voice. One Italian newspaper of the day declared, in the theatrical arts it is said that 3 things are required: action, action, action. Likewise, 3 things are demanded for music: voice, voice, voice. Example 26, 1. Watch a video of Craig Wright's Open Yale Course Class Session 19, Romantic Opera, Verdi's La Traviata, Bocelli, Pavarotti, and Domingo, at the text website. Not surprisingly, by placing such importance on the voices of the leading singers, bel canto opera fostered a star system among the cast. Usually, it was the lyric soprano, heroine and prima donna, who held the most exalted position in the operatic firmament. By the 1880s, she would also be called a diva, which, as in the aria, Casta diva, means goddess. Indeed, the diva and her beautiful voice would rule Italian bel canto opera throughout the 19th century and even down to the present day. Giuseppe Verdi. The name Giuseppe Verdi is virtually synonymous with Italian opera. For 6 decades, from the time of Nabucco in 1842 until Falstaff in 1893, Verdi had almost no rival for the affections of the opera-loving public in Italy and throughout Europe. Even today, the best-loved of his 26 operas are more readily available, in opera houses, TV productions, DVDs, and webcasts, than those of any other composer. Verdi was born near Busseto in northern Italy in 1813, the son of a tavern keeper. He was apparently no musical prodigy, for at the age of 18, he was rejected for admission to the Conservatory of Music in Milan because he was already too old and his piano technique faulty. But Verdi stayed on in Milan to study composition. He returned to Busseto in 1835 to serve as the town's bandmaster and then, 4 years later, went back to Milan to earn his livelihood as a composer. To be a composer in 19th-century Italy was to be a composer of opera. Verdi's first, Oberto, was produced at the famous La Scala Opera House in Milan in 1839, and it achieved a modicum of success. But his Nabucco of 1842 was a popular triumph, receiving an unprecedented 57 performances at La Scala in that year alone. Through subsequent productions in other theaters, Verdi's reputation quickly spread throughout Italy, to the rest of Europe, and even to North and South America. His career had been launched. Figures 26, 2, and 26, 3. La Scala Opera House about 1830. Verdi's first 4 and last 2 operas had their premieres at La Scala, then as now the foremost opera house in Italy. Verdi's longtime mistress, and ultimately his wife, Giuseppina Strepponi, holding the score of his early opera Nabucco. She was instrumental in getting this and other operas by Verdi produced at La Scala in Milan. Copyright Scala Art Resource, New York. The text, or libretto, of Nabucco, as well as most of Verdi's other operas of the 1840s, is covertly political. It concerns the suppression of a people by a cruel foreign power. By analogy, Verdi thus called attention to the plight of the Italian people, who were then ruled in large measure by the Austrians. Verdi had become a spirited Italian patriot. Normally, we do not think of music as expressing political ideas, but because opera was an important part of Italian mass culture, it could suborn political revolution. Verdi's soloists and choruses sang such fiery words as, "You may have the universe, so long as I keep Italy," and "Long live Italy. A sacred pact binds all her sons." Partly through such patriotic music and partly by accident, Verdi became a leader in the Risorgimento, the movement for a united Italy free of foreign domination. By handy coincidence, the letters of the composer's last name produced an acronym for Vittorio Emanuele Re d'Italia. Thus, cries of "Viva Verdi" echoed throughout Italy in hopes of unification. In 1861, after the goal of unification had been largely achieved, Verdi was elected to the country's first parliament, and later, in 1874, to its Senate. Copyright Roger Violet, Paris, the Bridgeman Art Library. But the path to national unity was not an easy one for the Italians. During the 1850s, Verdi became disillusioned with politics and turned his attention from national aspirations to personal drama. In quick order, he composed a trio of works without which no opera house today could function: Rigoletto, La Traviata, and Il Trovatore. For most of the early to mid-1850s, Verdi lived away from Milan, residing in Paris or traveling throughout Europe to oversee the production of his increasingly numerous works. He called these years of toil and intense productivity "my years as a galley slave." On his return to his homeland in 1857, the pace of Verdi's opera production slackened. He composed only when the subject was of such interest or the money so great that he couldn't refuse. His opera Aida, commissioned to celebrate the opening of the Suez Canal, brought him the astonishing fee of 150,000 francs. Verdi had become wealthy, and he retired to his estate in northern Italy to lead the life of a country squire, or so he thought. Download a supplementary listening guide for Verdi, La Donna e Mobile, from Rigoletto, at the text website. But like a performer who feels he owes the audience more, or has something more to prove to himself, Verdi returned to the theatre for two final encores, Otello and Falstaff, both exceptionally well-crafted operas based on dramas of Shakespeare. The latter work was written when the composer was on the threshold of 80, a feat without parallel in music history or the annals of the dramatic stage. He died peacefully at his country home in 1901, a much-respected national institution. Verdi's dramaturgy and musical style. When the curtain goes up on a Verdi opera, the listener will find elements of dramaturgy, construction of the drama, and musical style that are unique to this composer. For Giuseppe Verdi, conflict was at the root of every emotion, and he expressed conflict, whether personal or national, by juxtaposing self-contained, clearly contrasting units of music. A rousing march, a patriotic chorus, a passionate recitative, and a lyrical aria follow in quick succession. The composer aims not at musical and dramatic subtlety but rather at banner headlines of emotion. The emotional states of the characters are so clearly depicted, sometimes exaggerated, that the drama comes perilously close to melodrama, with its excess of sentimentality and sensationalism. But it is never dull. There is action, passion, and intensity, all the things that give an opera mass appeal. In 1854, Verdi said, "There is one thing the public will not tolerate in the theatre, boredom." Figure 26, 4. A photograph of Giuseppe Verdi, taken about 1885, on an early published score of his opera La Traviata. Copyright Mary Evans Picture Library. The Image Works. How does Verdi generate this feeling of intense passion and non-stop action? He does so by creating a new kind of recitative and a new style of aria. As before, recitative still narrates the action, and arias still express the character's emotional states. But Verdi replaces simple recitative, accompanied only by basso continuo, with orchestrally accompanied recitativo accompagnato. This allows the action to flow smoothly from orchestrally accompanied aria to orchestrally accompanied recitative and back without a jarring change of texture. As for the aria, Verdi brings to it a new intensity. Yes, he is a composer squarely in the tradition of Italian bel canto opera. He focuses his attention on the solo voice and on a lyrical, beautiful vocal line. Indeed, no composer had a greater gift for writing simple, memorable melodies that the audience could whistle on the way out of the theatre. Yet Verdi also adds intensity and passion to these arias by pushing the singers to the upper reaches of their range. The tenor is asked to sing up to the B above middle C, while the soprano must sing 2 octaves above middle C. The thrilling moments in which the hero or the heroine go right to the top are literally the high points of any Verdi opera. La Traviata. We may measure the high intensity and passion in Verdi's operas by listening to a portion of his La Traviata. La Traviata means literally, the woman gone astray. It tells the story of the sickly Violetta Valery, a courtesan, or kept woman, who first resists and then succumbs to the love of a new suitor, the young Alfredo Germont. For a while, the couple retires from Paris to lead a quiet life in the country. But without explanation, Violetta deserts Alfredo, in truth so that her scandalous reputation will not bring disgrace on his respectable family. The hot-tempered Alfredo now publicly insults Violetta, fights a duel with her new protector, and is banished from France. When the nature of Violetta's sacrifice is revealed, Alfredo rushes back to Paris. But it is too late. She is dying of tuberculosis, her fate dictated by an operatic convention that requires the heroine to sing one last show-stopping aria and then expire. Figure 26, 5. Marie Duplessis, the Paris Hilton of the 19th century. The end of her brief, scandalous life is the subject of Giuseppe Verdi's opera La Traviata. So notorious had she become by the time of her death at the age of 23 that Charles Dickens said, "You would have thought her passing was a question of the death of a hero or a Joan of Arc." Lebric Music and Arts. Verdi based the libretto of La Traviata on a play that he had seen in Paris in 1852 called Camille, by Alexandre Dumas the Younger. Camille tells the story of the real-life figure, Marie Duplessis, the mistress of the playwright Dumas and, for a short time, of the composer-pianist Franz Liszt as well. Marie served as the model for Violetta in Dumas's play and, year later, for the same character in Verdi's opera La Traviata. Like many in this period, Marie died young of tuberculosis, at the age of 23. We join La Traviata toward the end of the first act. A gala party is in progress in a fashionable Parisian salon, and here the dashing Alfredo has finally managed to cut Violetta away from the crowd to profess his love to her. He does so in the aria, Un dia felice, which is lovely, yet somber in tone. The seriousness of Alfredo's intent is underscored by the slow, square, even plodding accompaniment in the orchestra. When Violetta enters, she is supported by the same accompaniment, but the mood of the aria changes radically, becoming light and carefree. Witness Verdi's direct musical characterization at work. Alfredo's slow melody with a hint of minor is replaced by Violetta's flighty sound of high, rapidly moving notes. Eventually, the two join together, he below, somberly proclaiming the mysteries of love, she above, making light of them. What started as a solo aria has become a duet, the voices, and hands, of the principals now intertwined. Once again, music enhances drama by replicating in its own language the action on stage. What started out as a simple dance song has evolved into an almost hysterically virtuosic aria, as Violetta realizes that she will not be able to escape Alfredo's love. Alfredo kisses Violetta's hand and departs, leaving her alone on stage to ponder her future. She reveals, in a slow strophic aria, Offers Louis, that Alfredo may be the one true love she has long desired. But Violetta abruptly rejects the whole idea as impossible. Forget love, she says in an impassioned accompanied recitative, folly. Folly. What sort of crazy dream is this? Recitative leads naturally to aria, and here follows Semper Libera, one of the great show arias for soprano voice. It allows Violetta to declare forcefully her resolve to remain free of love's entanglements. This aria, too, helps define through music the character of the heroine, the extraordinary, carefree flourishes on the word pleasure, for example, reinforce her live for the moment approach to life. Violetta's declaration of independence is momentarily broken by the distant voice of Alfredo, who again sings of the mysterious powers of love. This, too, Violetta brushes aside as she emphatically repeats her pledge always to be free. Figure 26, 6. The great Australian soprano Joan Sutherland singing the role of Violetta, and tenor Luciano Pavarotti as Alfredo, in Verdi's La Traviata. Copyright Beatrice Schiller. Time Life Pictures. Getty Images. Verdi has moved quickly from slow aria, to recitative, to fast concluding aria. Such a three-movement unit is a dramatic convention of Italian opera called a scena. So, too, the fast aria at the end of the scena has a name, cabaletta. A cabaletta is a fast concluding aria in which the increased speed of the music allows one or more soloists to race off stage at the end of a scene or act. Here Violetta, vowing to remain free, dashes off as the curtain falls to end Act 1. But, of course, our heroine does not remain free, she falls fatally in love with Alfredo, as Acts 2 and 3 reveal. Listen now to the final scene of Act I of Verdi's La Traviata. Listening Exercise 33. Verdi La Traviata. 4-7 to 9-2-4 to 6. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. By the 19th century, the castrato had almost entirely disappeared from the operatic stage, and the leading roles of hero and heroine were sung by male tenor and female soprano, respectively. The following questions illuminate the way in which Giuseppe Verdi, working within the tradition of Italian bel canto opera, makes the female voice the center of attention. While Verdi from time to time pauses to allow the heroine a luxuriant moment of vocal virtuosity, he nonetheless pushes the opera forward at a rapid pace. Beautiful melody and fast action were the keys to Verdi's success. 1. Which term would not have been applied to the singer during the 19th century? A. Diva. B. Prima plata. C. Prima donna. D. Bel canto soprano. 2. This passage, in which Violetta expresses her fear of being a woman alone and abandoned in the populated desert of Paris, is a good example of what? A. Simple recitative. B. Secco recitative. C. Recitativo accompagnato. 3. What string technique does the orchestra employ to tell us of Violetta's agitated mental state? A. Tremolo. B. Vibrato. C. Pizzicato. D. Staccato. 4. What is the meter of this recitative? A. Duple. B. Triple. C. No clear meter. 5. On what word does Verdi engage in extravagant word painting? A. Folly. B. Parigi. C. Joyer. 6. Now Violetta launches into her brilliant cabaletta, Sempre Libera. What characteristic identifies this as a cabaletta? A. It is a fast concluding aria that Violetta will use to exit the stage. B. The soprano sings in a vocal range called the cabaletta. 7. Again Violetta vows to dedicate herself to a life of pleasure. What does the orchestra do during this vocal flourish? A. Merely plays chordal homophony. B. Creates the big guitar effect. C. Nothing. 8. Now Violetta repeats Sempre Libera, swearing again to remain free of the snares of love. Where does the vocal high point of Sempre Libera occur, that is, where does the soprano go to the top of her range? A. At the end of the first occurrence of the cabaletta, Sempre Libera. B. At the end of the reprise of the cabaletta, Sempre Libera. 9. To which singing does the term bel canto better pertain? A. The recitative, Folly. Folly. B. The cabaletta, Sempre Libera. 10. Consider now all the portions of La Traviata you have heard, beginning with the aria, Un di Felice, and ending with the cabaletta, Sempre Libera. What can we conclude about this Italian bel canto opera? A. It is very much an instrumentalist's opera focusing on the orchestra. B. It is very much a singer's opera focusing on the soprano voice. C. It is very much a singer's opera focusing on the tenor voice. The materials on the text website will help you understand and pass tests on the content of this chapter. In addition, you may watch Craig Wright's own lecture at Open Yale Courses and complete this chapter's listening exercise interactively, as well as view active listening guides and other materials that will help you succeed in this course. Key words: bel canto, prima donna, diva, risorgimento, recitativo, accompagnato, scena, cabaletta. Romantic opera, Germany 27. When we go to the opera today, we usually see supertitles in English but hear singing in one of two languages, Italian or German. Before 1820, opera was mainly an Italian affair. It was first created in Italy around 1600 and then, over the next 200 years, was exported to all parts of Europe. With the onset of the 19th century, however, other people, driven by an emerging sense of national pride, developed idiomatic opera in their native tongues. Although Italian opera remained the dominant style, it now had to share the stage, not only with traditional French opera but also with the newer forms of Russian, Czech, and especially German opera. Richard Wagner. The composer who realized the dream of a distinct, national German operatic tradition was Richard Wagner, a titanic figure in Western cultural history. Wagner was not merely a composer, he was also a philosopher, politician, propagandist, and ardent advocate for his own vision of dramatic music. Not only did he compose operas of monumental scope, he produced a large number of theoretical writings. So controversial are his theories and his art that Wagner has become for some an object of almost religious admiration, a cult figure, yet for others, particularly because of his anti-Semitic statements, he is the most detested composer in the history of Western music. For Wagner, opera was the perfect form of artistic expression, and the opera composer was something of a religious prophet who revealed to his congregation the wonders of the musical world. Figure 27, 1. Richard Wagner in an 1871 photograph. Copyright Haltendeutsch Collection Corbis. To be sure, Wagner's music is often inspiring. It contains moments of grandeur unmatched by any other composer. His influence on musical style in the late 19th century was enormous. Yet his reception by the musical public at large, then and now, has been divided. Some listeners are left cold, believing the music to be long-winded and the operatic plots devoid of realistic human drama. Others are immediately converted to adoring Wagnerites at the first sound of the heroic themes and powerful orchestral climaxes. Who was this controversial artist who has stirred such mixed feelings within the musical public for more than a century? Richard Wagner was born in Leipzig, Germany. Although he studied with the music director of the St. Thomas Church where Bach had worked, Wagner was largely self-taught in musical matters. After a succession of jobs as opera director in several small German towns, Wagner moved to Paris in 1839 in hopes of seeing his first opera produced there. But instead of meeting acclaim in Paris, as had Liszt and Chopin before him, Wagner was greeted with thundering indifference. No one could be persuaded to produce his work. Reduced to poverty, he spent a brief stint in debtor's prison. When Wagner's big break came, it was not in Paris but back in his native Germany, in the city of Dresden. His opera Rienzi was given a hearing there in 1842, and Wagner was soon offered the post of director of the Dresden Opera. During the next 6 years, he created 3 additional German romantic operas for the Dresden stage, Der Feigened Holländer, Tannhauser, and Lohengrin. In the aftermath of the political revolution that swept much of Europe in 1848, Wagner was forced to flee Dresden, though in truth he took flight as much to avoid his creditors as to escape any repressive government. Wagner found a safe haven in Switzerland, which was to be his home, on and off, for the next dozen years. Exiled now from the major opera houses in Germany, he began to imagine a complex of music dramas on a vast and unprecedented scale. What he ultimately created was Der Ring der Nibelungen, a set of 4 operas, now called the Ring Cycle, intended to be performed during the course of 4 successive evenings. Das Rheingold, the first, lasts 2.5 hours, Die Walküre and Siegfried each runs nearly 4.5 hours, while the finale, Götterdämmerung, goes on for no less than 5.5 hours. Wagner asked much of the human attention span when he composed this gargantuan epic. Unlike the great majority of composers throughout music history, Wagner wrote not only the music but also the librettos for his operas. For his 4-part Ring Cycle, he fashioned a single continuous epic by drawing on tales from German mythology. The scene is set in the smoky mists of primeval time, in a land of gods, river nymphs, dwarfs, giants, dragons, and sword-wielding heroes. In many ways, Wagner's Ring der Nibelungen is similar to J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy The Lord of the Rings. Both are multi-part sagas based on Nordic mythology, both are overrun with fantastic creatures, and both revolve around a much-coveted ring, which seems to offer its possessor unparalleled power, but which also carries a dark, sinister curse. But Wagner viewed his Ring Cycle not as a timeless fairy tale but rather as a timely allegory exploring the themes of power, greed, honor, bravery, and race in 19th-century German society. At that time, bravery, power, and national identity were themes with special resonance in Germany, which was then in the process of becoming a unified nation. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, for a time a friend and confidant of Wagner, modeled his superhero, or Superman, on Wagner's heroic character Siegfried in The Ring. In the 20th century, Adolf Hitler exploited Wagnerian symbolism to foster the notion of a superior German race, fortifying, for example, a Siegfried line on the Western Front during World War II. Not surprisingly, publishers and producers were at first reluctant to print or mount the operas of Wagner's Ring, given their massive scope and fantastic subject matter. They would, however, pay well for the rights to the composer's more traditional works. So, in the midst of his labors on the Ring cycle, the often penurious Wagner interrupted the project. For a period of years to create Tristan und Isolde and Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg. But these, too, were long and not easy to produce. The bulky scores piled up on his desk. In 1864, Wagner was rescued from his plight by King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who paid off his debts, gave him an annual allowance, encouraged him to complete the Ring tetralogy, and helped him to build a special theater where his giant operas could be mounted according to the composer's own specifications. This opera house, or festival theater as Wagner called it, was constructed at Bayreuth, a small town between Munich and Leipzig in southern Germany. The first Bayreuth festival took place in August 1876 with 3 successive performances of the entire Ring cycle. Following Wagner's death in 1883, his remains were interred on the grounds of the Wagner Villa in Bayreuth. Still controlled by the descendants of Wagner today, the Bayreuth Festival continues to stage the music dramas of Wagner, and only Wagner. Each summer thousands of opera lovers make the pilgrimage to this theatrical shrine to one of art's most determined and ruthless visionaries. Figure 27, 2. Bayreuth Festival Theater, an opera house built especially to produce the music dramas of Richard Wagner, and only Wagner. Interfoto Alami. Wagner's music dramas. With few exceptions, Wagner composed only operas, ignoring such concert hall genres as the symphony and concerto. But he wanted his opera to be radically different, so he gave it a different name, music drama. A music drama for Wagner was a musical work for the stage in which all the arts, poetry, music, acting, mime, dance, and scenic design, function as a harmonious ensemble. Such an artistic union Wagner referred to as a Gesamtkunstwerk. Thus combined, the unified force of the arts would generate more realistic drama. No longer would the dramatic action grind to a halt in order to spotlight the vocal flourishes of a soloist, as often happened in Italian opera. Indeed, Wagner's music drama differs from conventional Italian opera in several important ways. First, Wagner did away with the traditional numbers opera, a string of separate units such as aria, recitative, duet, and the like. Instead, he wrote a seamless flow of undifferentiated solo singing and declamation, what is called endless melody. Second, he removed ensemble singing almost entirely, duets, trios, choruses, and full cast finales became extremely rare. Finally, Wagner banished the tuneful aria to the wings. He avoids melodic repetition, symmetry, and regular cadences, all things that can make a tune catchy, in favor of long-flowing, non-repetitive, not particularly song-like lines. As the tuneful aria decreases in importance, the role of the orchestra increases. With Wagner, the orchestra is everything. It sounds forth the main musical themes, develops and exploits them, and thereby plays out the drama through pure instrumental music. On stage, the words and actions of the singers give the audience supplementary clues as to what the musical drama in the orchestra is all about. In the 1850s, Wagner drank deeply of the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, who wrote that music expresses the innermost basis of the world, the essence behind appearances. In music drama, what happens on the stage is the appearance, what happens in the orchestral pit below represents the deeper reality, the true drama. As had Beethoven and Berlioz before him, Wagner continued to expand the size of the orchestra. The orchestra he requires for the Ring cycle is massive, especially with regard to the brasses, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 8 horns, and a contrabass tuba. Perhaps most remarkable, the score calls for 6 harps. A bigger orchestra demanded, in turn, more forceful singers. To be heard above an orchestra of nearly 100 players, a large, specially trained voice was needed, the so-called Wagnerian tenor and Wagnerian soprano. The voice that typically dominates the operatic stage today, with its powerful sound and wide vibrato, first developed in Wagner's music dramas. Figure 27, 3. Cosima Wagner, Richard Wagner, and Liszt at Wagner's villa in Bayreuth in 1880. At the right is a young admirer of Wagner, Hans von Woolsegen, who first coined the term leitmotif. Mary Evans Picture Library. The Image Works. Tristan und Isolde. Wagner began to compose Tristan und Isolde during 1857 when living in Switzerland and supported in part by a wealthy patron, Otto Wesendonck. Although still married, the composer began an affair with Wesendonck's wife, Mathilde. So fully did Wagner the man live his life as Wagner the artist that it was impossible for him to create an opera dealing with passionate love without being passionately in love himself. By 1864, Wagner had made his way to Munich to prepare for the first production of the now finished Tristan. Having long since forgotten both Mathilde and his wife, he now fell in love with Cosima von Bülow, the wife of the man scheduled to conduct Tristan. Cosima was the illegitimate daughter of Franz Liszt and Marie Diagolt, and she and Wagner soon produced 3 illegitimate children of their own. The first of these, a daughter born on the first day of rehearsals for Tristan, was christened Isolde. The story of Tristan und Isolde comes from the medieval legends of King Arthur's England. Briefly, it is the tale of the love between Isolde, an Irish princess, and Tristan, a knight in the service of King Mark of Cornwall. Their love, however, is both illicit and ill-fated. They have mistakenly drunk a magical love potion. Isolde forgets her lawful husband and Tristan forgets his royal duty. Despairing of any happy union with Isolde in this world, Tristan allows himself to be mortally wounded in combat and sails off to his native Brittany to die. Isolde pursues him but arrives just in time to have him expire in her arms. Knowing that their union will only be consummated through death, Isolde sings her Liebestod, an ecstatic vision of their love beyond the grave, and then she, too, expires next to her lover's body. This was the sort of all-consuming, sacrificial love so dear to the hearts of romantic artists. Download supplementary listening guides for Wagner, Prelude to Tristan und Isolde, as well as development of several leitmotifs at the end of Act 1, Scene 5, at the text website. Wagner begins Tristan, not with a rousing, self-contained overture, but with a simple yet beautiful prelude that sets the general tone of the drama and leads directly to the raising of the curtain. The prelude opens with a plaintive call in the cellos, answered by one in the woodwinds. Each is not so much a lengthy theme as it is a short, pregnant motive. Wagner's disciples called each a leitmotif, a brief, distinctive unit of music designed to represent a character, object, or idea, which returns repeatedly in order to show how the drama is unfolding. Wagner's leitmotifs are usually not sung by the singers but rather are played by the orchestra. In this way, an element of the subconscious can be introduced into the drama. The orchestra can give a sense of what a character is thinking even when he or she is singing about something else. By developing, extending, varying, contrasting, and resolving these representational leitmotifs, Wagner is able to play out the essence of the drama almost without recourse to his singers. Figure 27, 4. Attending some well-known rock bands are fans who adoringly trek after their heroes. The Grateful Dead have their Deadheads, and Fish their Fish followers, for example. So, too, lovers of Wagner follow the music of their god, making annual pilgrimages to sites, be it Seattle, New York, or Bayreuth, where a Wagner festival or a performance of the Ring cycle can be heard. Wagnerian groupies are known as ringnuts, and it isn't difficult to spot them in a crowd. As one recently said in New York, when the Ring takes place, the clan will gather. Craig Wright. Leitmotifs in Tristan are associated mainly with feelings rather than concrete objects or persons. Typical are the leitmotifs representing longing, desire, and ecstasy. Example 27, 1. Notice how both the longing and desire motifs involve chromatic lines, the first descending, the second ascending. This sort of linear chromatic motion made it easy for the composer to wind continually through many different keys, not stopping long enough to establish any one as a home bass or tonic. This type of intense chromatic harmony loosened the feeling of key and eventually led to the collapse of tonality as the main organizing force in Western music, as we shall see. Here Wagner uses twisting chromatic lines for a specific expressive purpose, to convey a sense of the extreme pain felt by the ill-fated lovers. As you listen to the final scene of Tristan, you can feel Wagner trying to draw you into his all-enveloping world of love, longing, desire, and death. Here Isolde cradles the body of the dead Tristan and prepares to share his fate. As she sings her justly famous Liebestod, 4 leitmotifs sound forth, each heard previously in the opera. They frequently appear in melodic sequences, usually moving upward so as to convey a sense of continual longing and rising tension. Cadences are avoided, thereby increasing the endlessly restless mood. Dissonances are placed at points of climax to heighten the feeling of pain and anguish. At the end, the music reaches one last, glorious climax, and thereafter all is consonance and reduced movement. Isolde has joined Tristan in the world beyond. First, listen to the Liebestod, concentrating on the leitmotifs as they are presented by the voice and, to a greater degree, the orchestra. Then listen once more, this time just drinking in, like a love potion, all of Wagner's divinely inspired sound. If there is such a thing as a transcendental experience in romantic music, you will find it here. Download a supplementary listening guide for another moving farewell, Wotan's farewell to his daughter Brunhilde, from Wagner's Die Walküre, at the text website. Leitmotifs in Star Wars. The technique of the leitmotif, as developed by Richard Wagner, has been borrowed by many composers of Hollywood film music. To name just one, John Williams, the creator of the music for George Lucas's Star Wars series. When Williams wrote the music for Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi, he composed for each main character a particular musical motive. Below are 2 of Williams's leitmotifs, the first signifying the hero Luke Skywalker, and the second the evil Darth Vader. Like Wagner, Williams sets these leading motives in the orchestra, and thereby tells the audience what the character is thinking or what the future may hold. When young Luke is confined to his uncle's farm, for example, we learn that greater things await him. The orchestra plays the heroic force leitmotif in the background. In fact, Star Wars has more than just leitmotifs in common with Wagner's music dramas. Both Wagner and Lucas started with a core of 3 dramas and added a 4th as a preface or prequel. Lucas, of course, has added 3 further episodes to his saga, bringing his total to 7, but the leitmotifs remain the same. Both Wagner's cycle and Lucas's saga play out a series of epic battles between larger-than-life heroes and villains, mythical forces for good and evil, warring throughout cosmic time. Listening Exercise 34. Wagner. Liebestod from Tristan und Isolde. 4:10, 11. 2:7, 8. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. Isolde's Liebestod, which brings Tristan und Isolde to a glorious conclusion, is written for soprano voice, indeed, for a dramatic Wagnerian soprano. But even this powerful voice cannot always be clearly heard above Wagner's large, surging orchestra. Imagine a Verdi opera in which the hero or heroine could not be heard. As some of the following questions suggest, there are several ways in which the German music dramas of Wagner differ from the Italian operas of Verdi. 1. Does the orchestra establish a clear pa or pa accompaniment in the Liebestod? A. Yes. B. No. 2. When the soprano sings the ecstasy leitmotif, she does so to rather square poetry, lines of 4 plus 4 syllables with internal rhyme. 1. Klagend, Alice sag end. Moaning. Bliss, expressing all, mild versenend aus im tonend. Gently. Forgiving, sounding from within. What is the course of the soprano line during this couplet? A. It rises. B. It rises in a melodic sequence. C. It falls. D. It falls in a melodic sequence. 3. Immediately afterwards, the music rises toward a climax to reflect the sentiment of the next couplet. In Michigan dringet, auf sich schwinget. Pierces. Me, soars upwards, hold Halland am Michigan klinget, blessedly echoing all around me? How is this rising tension brought about in the music? A. Tremolos are played by the strings. B. There is a gradual crescendo. C. The voice rises up chromatically. D. All of the above. 4. Wagner now builds to a final climax with the desire leitmotif churning in the orchestra. Here the composer employs what tried and true method to conjure up a feeling of increasing tension. A. He has the powerful orchestra proceed in ever-rising melodic sequence. B. He has the powerful orchestra proceed in ever-falling melodic sequence. 5. The great climax has been reached. How does Wagner now musically depict the final words of Isolde, to drown, to sink down, unconscious, supreme bliss? A. The vocal line continually falls. B. The vocal line soars up, then falls. C. The vocal line falls, then soars up and holds a note. 6. Which leitmotif is heard softly in the oboes immediately before the final chord? A. Ecstasy. B. Transcendent bliss. C. Desire. 7. In this passage, Wagner brings us to the end of the opera. The nature of the music changes to suggest a feeling of winding down. Which one of the following does not occur? A. The tempo of the music appears to get slower. B. The transcendent bliss leitmotif no longer rises upward. C. The orchestra drives toward its own fortissimo climax. D. The dynamic level gradually changes from loud to soft. 8. Who has the last word, that is, who is heard at the very end of the Liebstod? A. The orchestra. B. The voice. 9. Which musical force could be omitted without serious loss to the overall effect of the piece? A. The orchestra. B. The voice. 10. Which of the following is true about the Liebstod? A. Wagner places tremendous demands on the singer, in part because the voice has no pauses of more than 3 seconds until she ceases singing. B. Although Wagner places tremendous demands on the singer, requiring mostly fortissimo singing, he nonetheless builds in several breaks of about 10 seconds duration along the way. The materials on the text website will help you understand and pass tests on the content of this chapter. In addition, you may complete this chapter's listening exercise interactively, as well as view active listening guides and other materials that will help you succeed in this course. Key words: Ring Cycle Bayreuth Festival, Music Drama Gesamtkunstwerk Liebstod Leitmotif, 19th Century Realistic Opera 28. Romantic opera, both Italian and German, typically concludes with the lovers eternally united, if not in this world, then in the one beyond. Moreover, the stage is populated by larger-than-life characters or by the well-to-do, people of leisure untroubled by mundane concerns or financial worries. During the second half of the 19th century, however, a contrasting type of opera developed in Europe, one more in tune with the social truths of the day. It is called realistic opera, because the subject matter treats issues of everyday life in a realistic way. Poverty, physical abuse, industrial exploitation, and crime, afflictions of the lower classes in particular, are presented on stage for all to see. In realistic opera, rarely is there a happy ending. Realistic opera reflected the social, scientific, and artistic developments of the 19th century, which saw the worst effects of the Industrial Revolution, including oppressive factory conditions resulting in widespread social disintegration. The 19th century also witnessed the emergence of the theory of evolution, first popularized in Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which posits a dog-eat-dog world in which only the fittest survive. Painters such as J.F. Millet and the young Vincent van Gogh captured on canvas the life of the downtrodden, as did writers Charles Dickens and Émile Zola in their realistic novels. The aim of these artists was to transform the mundane and the commonplace into art, to find the poetic and heroic in even the most ordinary aspects of human experience. Figure 28, 1. Vincent van Gogh, The Potato Eaters. During his youth, Van Gogh chose to live and work in the coal mining region of eastern Belgium. This grim painting records his impressions of life within a mining family and the evening meal of potatoes and tea. Art Resource, New York. Similarly reflecting the credo that art must imitate life, the plots of realistic operas embrace the gritty side of this world. In Bizet's Carmen, the heroine is a knife-wielding gypsy girl who works in a cigarette factory. In Leoncavallo's Pagliacci, a jealous clown stabs his wife to death, and in Puccini's To Sca, an abused singer murders the chief of police. If traditional romantic opera is usually sentimental and idealistic, 19th-century realistic opera is sensational and usually pessimistic. Georges Bizet's Carmen. The first important realistic opera is Carmen by Georges Bizet. Bizet, who spent his short life entirely in Paris, was primarily an opera composer, and Carmen is his masterpiece. Set in 19th-century Spain, Carmen centers on a sensual young gypsy woman known only as Carmen. This sexually assertive, willful woman holds the populace in her sway. By means of her alluring dance and song, she seduces a naive army corporal, Don José. Falling hopelessly in love, Don José deserts his military post, marries Carmen, and takes up with her gypsy bandit friends. But Carmen, who refuses to belong to any man, soon abandons Don José to give herself to the handsome bullfighter Escamillo. Having lost all for nothing, the humiliated Don José stabs Carmen to death in a bloody ending. Figure 28, 2. Soprano Lentine Price, who is heard on our recording of the habanera from Bizet's Carmen, has often sung the title role. Copyright Bettman Corbis. This violent conclusion highlights the stark realism of Carmen. The heroine is a woman of easy virtue available to every man, albeit on her own terms. She lives for the moment, surrounded by social outcasts, prostitutes, and bandits. All this was shocking stuff for the refined Parisian audiences of Bizet's day. During the first rehearsals in 1875, the women of the chorus threatened to strike because they were asked to smoke and fight on stage. Critics called the libretto obscene. Bizet's producers asked him to tone down the more lurid aspects of the drama, to make it more acceptable as family entertainment, but he refused. Carmen is full of alluring melodies including the well-known Toreador song and the even more beloved habanera. In fashioning these tunes, Bizet borrowed phrases from several Spanish popular songs, folk songs, and flamenco melodies. The habanera, which introduces the character Carmen, makes use of a then popular Spanish song. Literally, habanera means, the thing from Havana. Musically, it is a type of dance song that developed in Spanish-controlled Cuba during the early 19th century. African and Latin influences on its musical style can perhaps be seen in the descending chromatic scale, and certainly in the static harmony, as well as in the insistent, repetitious rhythm. The infectious rhythm of the habanera gives it its irresistible quality. We all want to get up and join the dance. But the habanera is a sensual dance, like its descendant the tango, and this sensual quality contributes greatly to Carmen's seductive aura. The structure of Bizet's habanera is straightforward. At first, Carmen sings a descending chromatic line of 4 4-bar phrases. By their nature, highly chromatic melodies often seem to have no tonal center. This one, too, is musically noncommittal and slippery, just as Carmen herself is both ambiguous and evasive. The chorus immediately repeats the chromatic melody, but now Carmen voluptuously glides above it, singing the single word l'amour. As her voice soars, like the elusive bird of love, the tonality shifts from minor to major. To this is then added a refrain in which the melody alternates between a major triad and a minor one. Against this refrain, the chorus shouts, "Watch out," warning of Carmen's destructive qualities. This same structure, a chromatically descending melody, followed by a triadic refrain with choral shouts, then repeats. Bizet wanted his habanera to establish the character of Carmen as a sensual enchantress. In every way, the music is Carmen. And like Carmen, once this seductive melody has us in its spell, it will never let go. Carmen from flop to hip-hop. At its premiere in Paris on March 3, 1875, Carmen was a flop. The realistic subject matter was thought too degrading. Despondent over this poor reception, composer Georges Bizet suffered a fatal heart attack exactly 90 days later. As the 19th century progressed and theatrical subjects became increasingly realistic, however, the appeal of Carmen grew. Now arguably the world's most popular opera, Carmen has been recorded many times and has been transformed into nearly 20 films, including an early silent one of 1915 and an Academy Award-winning production of 1984. In addition, the most popular melodies of Carmen serve as background music in countless TV commercials and cartoons, and are sometimes the object of parody. In an early episode of The Simpsons, the family goes to the opera where it hears, "What else, Carmen?" and Bart and Homer sing along. Carmen has also been refashioned into an African opera set in Senegal, an African-American Broadway musical, and an MTV special. Not surprisingly for a realistic opera, Carmen is a work that transcends race and class, and that quality accounts in part for its lasting popularity. Beyoncé poses with the red dress that she wore in Carmen, a hip-hop era. Frank Maislata Getty Images. See a video of the Muppets Habanera performance in the YouTube playlist on the text website. Listening exercise 35. Bizet. Habanera from Carmen. 412. 29. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. The enduring popularity of Bizet's Carmen can be explained in part by its sensational plot, socially diverse characters, captivating melodies, and rousing choruses, as the following questions suggest. 1. Which older sensual dance has the same rhythmic pattern as the habanera? A. The flamenco. B. The tango. C. The fandango. 2. The sultry mood of the beginning is created in part by the presence of which mode? A. Major. B. Minor. 3. What type of scale does the elusive Carmen execute when she first begins to sing? A. Major. B. Minor. C. Chromatic. 4. How do we sense that Carmen is a sensual creature? A. The singer shakes an exotic percussion instrument called the castanet. B. The singer recalls her earlier days as a cigar maker in Havana. C. The singer does not move from one exact pitch to the next, but slides upward between pitches. 5. When the chorus enters, it sings what? A. A flamenco tune. B. A gypsy melody. C. The melody just sung by Carmen. 6. Carmen now sings the refrain. What is the mode of the refrain? A. Major. B. Minor. 7. Consider the second stanza of the habanera. Which is true? A. It is essentially the same in content and length as the first stanza. B. It offers an elaborate variation of the first stanza. 8. Accordingly, what is the form of this habanera? A. Strophic. B. Theme and variations. C. Through composed. 9. What likely makes Bizet's habanera such a successful number? A. It possesses not one, but two seductive melodies, one major, the other minor. B. It combines the beauty of an aria with the power of a chorus. C. Despite the sometimes soaring vocal lines, it is firmly grounded on an ostinato bass. D. All of the above. 10. Which of the following musicals is not a Broadway counterpart of realistic opera? A. Rent. B. West Side Story. C. The Lion King. Giacomo Puccini's L.A. Bohème. Italian realistic opera of the late 19th century goes by its own special name, Verismo opera. Yet while it enjoys a separate name, Verismo opera in Italy was little different than realistic opera elsewhere. Although many Italian composers wrote Verismo operas, by far the best known today is Giacomo Puccini. Giacomo Puccini was the scion of 4 generations of musicians from the northern Italian town of Lucca. His father and his grandfather had both written operas, and his forebears before them had composed religious music for the local cathedral. But Puccini was no child prodigy. For a decade following his graduation from the Milan Conservatory, he lived in poverty as he struggled to develop a distinctive operatic style. Not until the age of 35 did he score his first triumph, the Verismo opera Manon Lescaut. Thereafter, successes came in quick order: La Bohème, Tosca, and Madama Butterfly. Growing famous, wealthy, and a bit complacent, Puccini worked less and less frequently. His last, and many believe his best, opera, Turandot, was left unfinished at the time of his death from throat cancer in 1924. Figure 28, 3. Giacomo Puccini. Copyright T.P. Lebrecht. Music and Arts. Puccini's best-known opera, indeed the most famous of all Verismo operas, is La Bohème. The realism of La Bohème rests in the setting and characters. The principals are bohemians, unconventional artists living in abject poverty. The hero, Rodolfo, and his pals Schaunard, Colline, and Marcello inhabit an unheated attic on the left bank of Paris. The heroine, Mimi, their neighbor, is a poor, tubercular seamstress. Rodolfo and Mimi meet and fall in love. He grows obsessively jealous while she becomes progressively ill. They separate for a time, only to return to each other's arms immediately before Mimi's death. If this sounds familiar, there may be a reason. The Pulitzer Prize-winning musical Rent is a modern adaptation of this bohemian tale, but here the protagonist dies of AIDS in Greenwich Village, rather than of tuberculosis in Paris. In truth, there is not much of a plot to La Bohème, nor is there much character development. Instead, the glorious sound of the human voice carries the day. Puccini continues the 19th-century tendency to lessen the distinction between recitative and aria. His solos typically start syllabically, as if the character is beginning a conversation. Gradually, the voice grows in intensity and becomes more expansive, with the strings doubling the melody to add warmth and expression. When Rodolfo, for example, sings of Mimi's frozen little hand in the aria, C'è gelida manina, we move imperceptibly from recitative to aria, gradually transcending the squalor of the left bank garret and soaring to a better world far beyond. The contrast between the dreary stage setting and the transcendental beauty of the music is the great paradox of realistic opera. The materials on the text website will help you understand and pass tests on the content of this chapter. In addition, you may complete this chapter's listening exercise interactively, as well as view active listening guides and other materials that will help you succeed in this course. Key words: realistic opera, flamenco, habanera, verismo opera. 29. Music and nationalism. Music does not exist in isolation. As we have seen with realistic opera, it is often influenced by contemporary social, scientific, and artistic developments. So, too, music can be affected by politics. The 19th century was a period in which various European ethnic groups sought to free themselves from foreign domination. During the 1820s and 1830s, the Greeks fought to throw off the rule of the Ottoman Turks, the Poles strove to end control by the Russians, and the Belgians broke free from the Dutch. Simultaneously, lands previously divided into small states became unified nations. In 1861, Italy, once a patchwork of city-states controlled by Austria and Spain, achieved full independence and unification, with Rome as its capital. 10 years later, a German nation, under the political leadership of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, was formally recognized. Smaller groups, such as the Czechs, Hungarians, Poles, and Finns, sought to break free from more powerful nations, such as Germany, Austria, and Russia. These groups likewise exhibited pride in their national traditions, each highlighting its cultural individuality through artistic expression. Owing to its emotive power, music naturally gave voice to ethnic and linguistic distinction, a process called musical nationalism. A flood of national anthems, native dances, protest songs, and victory symphonies gave musical expression to the rising tide of nationalism. The Star-Spangled Banner, the Marseillaise, and Italian Brothers, Italy has arisen were all products of revolution and patriotic zeal. National color in music was communicated by means of indigenous folk elements, folk songs, native scales, dance rhythms, and local instrumental sounds. It could also be conveyed by the use of national subjects, the life of a national hero, for example, as the program for a symphonic poem or the libretto for an opera. Among musical compositions with overtly nationalistic titles are Hungarian Rhapsodies, Russian Easter Overture, Slavonic Dances, Ma Vlast, and Finlandia. The desire to embrace nationalist musical elements would continue into the 20th century in the works of such prominent composers as the Russian Stravinsky, the Hungarian Bartók, and the American Ives. For all these composers, a musical signifier served as a badge of both personal identity and national pride. Download a supplementary listening guide for Smetana's The Moldau, from Ma Vlast, at the text website. Russian nationalism, Modest Mussorgsky. Russia was one of the first countries to develop its own national style of art music, one distinct and separate from the traditions of German orchestral music and Italian and German opera. An early use of Russian subject matter can be found in Mikhail Glinka's opera A Life for the Tsar. Glinka's nationalist spirit was passed to a group of young composers whom contemporaries dubbed the Mighty Handful, or, less grandiosely, the Russian Five: Alexander Borodin, Cesar Chue, Mily Balakirev, Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, and Modest Mussorgsky. They dedicated themselves to writing Russian music, free of Western influence, for the Russian people. Of these, the most original and least Western in musical style was Mussorgsky. As with most members of the Russian Five, Mussorgsky did not at first seem destined for a career in music. He was trained to be a military officer and for a period of 4 years was commissioned in the Russian army. He resigned his appointment in 1858 in favor of a minor post as a civil servant and more free time to indulge his avocation, musical composition. The next year he said, "I have been a cosmopolitan, but now there's been some sort of regeneration. Everything Russian is becoming dear to me." Unfortunately, his brief, chaotic life was marked by increasing poverty, depression, and alcoholism. During his few periods of creative productivity, Mussorgsky managed to compile a small oeuvre, which includes a boldly inventive symphonic poem, Night on Bald Mountain, an imaginative set of miniatures for piano, pictures at an exhibition, and an operatic masterpiece, Boris Godunov, based on the life of a popular 16th-century Russian Tsar. Many of Mussorgsky's works were left unfinished at the time of his death in 1881. Figure 29, 1. Modest Mussorgsky. Copyright Tretiakov Gallery, Moscow. The Bridgman Art Library. Pictures at an exhibition. The genesis of pictures at an exhibition can be traced to the death of Mussorgsky's close friend, the Russian painter and architect Victor Hartmann, who had died suddenly of a heart attack in 1873. As a memorial to Hartmann, an exhibition of his paintings and drawings was mounted in Moscow the next year. Mussorgsky was inspired to capture the spirit of Hartmann's works in a series of 10 short pieces for piano. To provide unity within the sequence of musical pictures, the composer hit on the idea of incorporating a recurring interlude, which he called Promenade. This gave listeners the impression of enjoying a leisurely stroll through a gallery, moving from one of Hartmann's paintings to the next each time the promenade music was heard. Though originally composed as a work for piano, the imaginative sounds of the 10 musical pictures begged for orchestration, a task that several composers later undertook. Pictures at an exhibition is best known today in the brilliantly orchestrated version by Maurice Ravel, completed in 1922. Promenade. Here the composer projects himself, and by extension the listener, as wandering through an exposition of Hartmann paintings. Immediately, we are transported musically into a world of purely Russian art. The tempo is marked, fast but resolute, in the Russian manner. The meter is irregular, as in a folk dance, with alternating 5 and 6 beat measures, and the melody is built on a pentatonic scale, which uses only 5 notes instead of the usual Western scale of 7, here B, C, D, F, and G. Throughout the world, indigenous folk cultures use the pentatonic scale. To appreciate the power of the pentatonic scale around the globe, watch World Science Fair 2009. Bobby McFerrin demonstrates, in the YouTube playlist on the text website. Example 29, 1. Now begins a musical depiction of 10 paintings. We focus our gaze on numbers 4, 6, and 10. Figures 29, 2 and 29, 3. Victor Hartmann, pencil drawing, a rich Jew. The subject wears a comfortable fur skull cap, the symbol of his religion. Victor Hartmann, pencil and watercolor, a poor Jew. The subject sits downcast, a sack containing his worldly possessions placed nearby. Mussorgsky created appropriately downcast music to characterize this figure. Copyright RIA Novosti, the Bridgman Art Library. Copyright RIA Novosti, the Bridgman Art Library. Picture 4, Polish ox cart. Hartmann's scene is a view of a rickety ox cart lumbering down a dirt road. The rocking of the cart is suggested by a two-note ostinato. Notice in this brief composition how music can project a sense of time and movement in a way that a painting cannot. In Mussorgsky's setting, the viewer remains stationary as the cart appears in the distance, moves closer and closer by means of a crescendo, and slowly disappears as the orchestra is gradually reduced to playing PPP. In addition, Mussorgsky was aware of an important acoustical phenomenon: larger sound waves travel farther than shorter waves. Thus, in Polish ox cart, Mussorgsky begins and ends with the very lowest sounds, to give the impression that the sound comes from a distance and then disappears again into the distance. Picture 6, Samuel Goldenberg and Schmeil, two Jews, rich and poor. As the title suggests, we are looking here at a pair of Hartmann's drawings, both of which are reproduced. One Jew gazes forward confidently, the other displays an attitude of despair. They might just as well be two Christians or two Muslims. What counts here is social status, not religion. The Oriental quality of Mussorgsky's musical setting, however, makes clear that the two hail from Eastern Europe. In particular, the augmented second, which Mussorgsky associates with Goldenberg, recalls the Eastern European folk genre of Jewish klezmer music. Picture 10, The Great Gate of Kiev. The stimulus for the majestic conclusion to pictures at an exhibition was Hartmann's design for a new and grandiose gate to the ancient city of Kiev, then part of Russia. Mussorgsky arranges his thematic material to give the impression of a parade passing beneath the giant gate, in what is tantamount to rondo form. The majestic vision of the gate alternates with religious music for a procession of Russian pilgrims, and even the composer-viewer walks beneath the gate as the promenade theme appears, before a final return to a panoramic view of the gate, now with Hartmann's bells ringing triumphantly. In this climactic final tableau, Ravel's setting for full orchestra is able to give more powerful expression to all of the local color and grandeur inherent in Mussorgsky's original music for piano, just as Mussorgsky's musical creation is a more powerful artistic statement than was Hartmann's original design. Figure 29, 4. Victor Hartmann's vision, The Great Gate of Kiev, which inspired the last of the musical paintings in Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition. Note the bells in the tower, a motif that is featured prominently at the very end of Mussorgsky's musical evocation of this design. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. Copyright RIA Novosti, the Bridgman Art Library. Listening exercise 36. Mussorgsky. Pictures at an exhibition. 4:14, 17. 2:10, 11. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. For pictures at an exhibition, this exercise is limited to Promenade and the Great Gate of Kiev, both of which are available on the 2 CD set and the 5 CD set. Both tableaus have elements of the exotic Russian East. Promenade not only makes use of the pentatonic scale but also has irregular meters typical of Eastern European folk dances, while the Great Gate of Kiev has a distinctive section that suggests non-Western ways of organizing musical sound. Promenade 1. Throughout Promenade, the meter is irregular, which is typical of Eastern European folk music. What is correct regarding the beginning? A. The trumpet plays for 11 beats, and the full brasses respond for 22 beats. B. The trumpet plays for 22 beats, and the full brasses for 22 beats. C. The trumpet plays for 11 beats, and the full brasses for 11 beats. 2. There are two complementary musical phrases. Which is true of each? A. The trumpet plays the first 11 beats, and the brasses the next 11. B. The trumpet plays the first 7 beats, and the brasses join for the next 4. 3. How would you describe the musical texture here? A. A monophonic trumpet is followed by polyphonic brass choir. B. A monophonic trumpet is followed by a homophonic brass choir. 4. Try to tap your foot and conduct first a duple and then a triple pattern. What do you conclude? A. The meter is irregular, shifting back and forth from duple to triple. B. The meter is in a consistent duple pattern. C. The meter is in a consistent triple pattern. 5. Which is true about the ending of promenade? A. A phrase of 11 beats is followed by a phrase of 9. B. A phrase of 9 beats is followed by a phrase of 11. The Great Gate of Kiev. 6. How would you describe the mode and texture at the beginning? A. Major and homophonic. B. Major and polyphonic. C. Minor and homophonic. D. Minor and polyphonic. 7. Tap your foot to the music and try conducting, first with a duple meter pattern and then with a triple meter one. Which of the following is true? A. The music has a regular duple meter. B. The music has a regular triple meter. C. The music continues the irregular meter of promenade. 8. Exotic sounds, similar to those of Eastern music, are suggested in this passage. Which is not one of them? A. The sound of a gong and cymbal. B. Chinese eru playing the melody. C. A shimmering tremolo in the strings. D. A static harmony that repeats in 4-beat cycles. 9. To give the conclusion a feeling of majesty, what happens? A. The full orchestra plays and the tempo slows. B. The full orchestra drives quickly and triumphantly to the end. 10. Notice the many percussion instruments sounding here at the end: bass and snare, drums, cymbal, and bells. Besides sharpening the rhythmic profile of the music, percussion instruments, as exemplified here, do what? A. Add clarity and lightness to the music. B. Add intricate melodic counterpoint to the texture. C. Add weight and sonic body to the texture. Czech and American nationalism, Antonín Dvořák, 1841. 1904. In the 19th century, the Russians, with their huge army, were capable of dominating their neighbors. The Czechs, on the other hand, were a much smaller ethnic group surrounded, and often controlled, by foreigners. The country we today call the Czech Republic, comprising the provinces of Bohemia and Moravia, historically was dominated by German-speaking countries, Germany to the west and north, and Austria to the south. These larger German nations tended to lure away the best Czech minds. Gustav Mahler and Sigmund Freud were two citizens of Moravia who were drawn to big city Vienna, for example. But some musicians, namely, Bedřich Smetana, Leos Janáček, and Antonín Dvořák, remained at home and succeeded in cultivating a distinctly Czech musical style. Of these three Czech nationalists, Antonín Dvořák is today by far the best known. Ironically, at first he was not known at all. Dvořák is a classic case of a late bloomer, or, perhaps more accurately, his talent was late to be recognized, owing to the comparative obscurity of the minority culture to which he belonged. The son of a butcher, Dvořák spent the first 20 years of his adult life as a freelance musician in Prague, where he cobbled together a living as a violist and organist, playing in dance bands and opera orchestras and in church. Yet all the while he composed tirelessly, operas, symphonies, and string quartets, almost all of which went unheard. Figure 29, 5. Antonín Dvořák conducting. Copyright ET Archive, London Superstock. When recognition came, it did so not through these complex high art forms, but rather in simpler music that could be played on the piano at home. In 1878, Dvorak published Slavonic Dances, a set of 8 pieces for piano duet that incorporate the spirit of the folk music of the Czechs. These caught on like wildfire, and Dvorak was soon known throughout Europe. Now even his more ambitious, high art works were given performances in London, Berlin, Vienna, Moscow, Budapest, and even in the United States, in Cincinnati, which then included a large German and Czech contingent among its population. In the spring of 1892, Dvorak received an offer he couldn't refuse. He was promised the astonishing sum of $15,000 per year to become director of the newly founded National Conservatory of Music in New York City. And so on September 17, 1892, Dvorak set sail for America and ultimately took up residence at 327 East 17th Street. It was here that he began work on his American Quartet and his Symphony No. 9, from the New World. Instead of returning to Prague that summer, Dvorak and his family traveled by train and carriage to Spillville, Iowa, spending 3 months among the mainly Czech-speaking people of this rural farming community. During his 3 years in America, Dvorak befriended Harry T. Burley, a black singer and composer. He also took on a black composition student, Maurice Arnold. From both men, Dvorak came to know the music of African American spirituals and to believe that the path toward a truly national American music lay in what Dvorak called Negro melodies. 2 such tunes that he directly or indirectly borrowed were the melody of his famous Humoresque and that of the slow movement of his Symphony No. 9, from the New World. Prove to yourself that you know the tune for Dvorak's Humoresque by watching a video of it, in the YouTube playlist on the text website. Largo from Symphony No. 9, from the New World. While an energetic and tuneful first movement and a powerful finale frame the symphony, from the New World, the slow second movement is the emotional soul of the work. A mood of calm strength envelopes the opening, a memorable moment for players of brass instruments and listeners alike. Once this solidly serene atmosphere is established, a haunting melody emerges from the English horn. Throughout the Romantic period, the English horn was used to suggest a feeling of distance and nostalgia, looking back on a time, place, and people that are now no more. Sometimes the nostalgia was for an imaginary world that existed only in the mind of the creator. But certainly in the psyche of turn-of-the-century Americans, Dvorak's melody represented home, because a publisher extracted the tune from the symphony and printed it as a song with words under the title, Goin' Home. Figure 29, 6. An autograph sketch of the famous English horn theme from the second movement of Dvorak's symphony, from the New World. The tempo was later changed from andante to largo and some of the notes altered to emphasize the pentatonic scale, a traditional signifier of the folk. For example, compare the sketch to the final version in the listening guide below, and notice that the GS have been removed. Facsimile Craig Wright. Download a supplementary listening guide for the first movement of Dvorak's symphony, from the New World, at the text website. But to whose home? Is this a melody composed from scratch by Dvorak in the style of a folk song, or is it one taken from an African-American colleague? Is it distinctly American or Czech? In truth, the melody is built around a pentatonic scale, here D, E, F, A, B, which, as we have seen, is characteristic of folk music around the world. But this is the power of music. Each listener can hear this movement as an avatar of the memories and emotions of a distant home and homeland, no matter where. The materials on the text website will help you understand and pass tests on the content of this chapter. In addition, you may complete this chapter's listening exercise interactively, as well as view active listening guides and other materials that will help you succeed in this course. Key words: musical nationalism, Russian 5 pentatonic scale. 30 late Romantic orchestral music. The late 19th century was the heyday of the symphony orchestra. Think about how sound was made in those days. There were no iPods or computers, and no amplified surround sound, indeed, no electronically amplified sound at all. To hear an overwhelming sound that would blow them away, listeners had to attend a concert of a large symphony orchestra. In fact, Discounting the noise of a steam engine or a cannon, the highest decibel level created by humans at this time was that of the symphony orchestra. Ironically, the recent revolution in disseminating sound electronically has been accompanied by a decline in the quality of sound that we hear. Listening to Beethoven or Wagner delivered via compressed MP3 files on speakers or headphones attached to a computer or iPod gives only a vague approximation of the 19th century original. To hear the real thing, we must go to a large concert hall preserving the 19th century architecture. The period 1870-1910 was a golden age for the construction of large concert halls, not only in Europe but also in the United States. Auditoriums built during this period, such as the Musikverein in Vienna, Carnegie Hall in New York, Symphony Hall in Boston, and Woolsey Hall in New Haven, remain the finest ever built, especially with regard to their excellent acoustics. Thus, the recently constructed Schermerhorn Symphony Center in Nashville was modeled on those in Vienna and Boston. All of these were built to be large concert halls, seating 2,700 listeners and accommodating many performers on stage. The late 19th century orchestra was large and loud. During the century, more and more instruments were added from top to bottom. The brass section grew especially large. And to balance these additions, more and more string players were needed. The symphonic works of Johannes Brahms, Anton Bruckner, Gustav Mahler, and Richard Strauss typically required an orchestra that approached 100 players. The continued growth in the number and variety of instruments made listening to a live symphony orchestra the most powerful aesthetic experience that a citizen of the late 19th century could enjoy. As the symphony orchestra grew in size, the genres of music it performed became more numerous. New kinds of program music had arisen during the Romantic era, including the concert overture, the tone poem, and the program symphony. But the mainstay of the orchestra remained the four-movement symphony and the three-movement concerto, neither with programmatic intent. The late Romantic symphony and concerto. The four-movement symphony originated during the classical period, principally in the orchestral works of Haydn and Mozart, and remained a favorite with audiences throughout the 19th century, except in Italy. Symphonic composers in the Romantic period generally continued to follow the four-movement format inherited from their classical forebears: fast, slow, minuet or scherzo, fast. Yet throughout the 19th century, the movements got progressively longer. Perhaps as a consequence, composers wrote fewer symphonies. Schumann and Brahms composed only 4, Mendelssohn, 5, Tchaikovsky, 6, and Dvorak, Bruckner, and Mahler, 9 each. No one approached the 40-odd symphonies of Mozart, to say nothing of the 104 of Haydn. Similarly for the concerto, with expanded length came a reduction in number. A classical concerto may last 20 minutes, a romantic 140. Mozart gave us 23 piano concertos, but Beethoven only 5. Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Brahms, and Tchaikovsky penned just a single violin concerto, yet each is a substantial showpiece for the soloist. Despite its growing length, the Romantic concerto retained the three-movement plan established during the classical period: fast, slow, fast. For a Romantic composer contemplating the creation of a symphony or concerto, no figure loomed larger than Beethoven. Wagner asked why anyone after Beethoven bothered to write symphonies at all, given the dramatic impact of Beethoven's third, fifth, and ninth. Wagner himself wrote only one, and Verdi none. Some composers, notably Berlioz and Liszt, turned to a completely different sort of symphony, the program symphony, in which an external scenario determined the nature and order of the musical events. It was not until the late Romantic period, nearly 50 years after the death of Beethoven, that someone emerged to claim the title of successor to Beethoven the symphonist. That figure was Johannes Brahms. Figure 31. Johannes Brahms in his early 30s. Said an observer of the time, the broad chest, the Herculean shoulders, the powerful head, which he threw back energetically when playing, all betrayed an artistic personality replete with the spirit of true genius. The Art Archive Historisches Museum, Vienna. Johnny Dagliordi. Johannes Brahms. Brahms was born in the North German port city of Hamburg in 1833. He was given the Latin name Johannes to distinguish him from his father Johann, a street musician and beer hall fiddler. Although Johannes's formal education never went beyond primary school, his father saw to it that he received the best training on the piano and in music theory, with the works of Bach and Beethoven given pride of place. While he studied these masters by day, by night Brahms earned money playing out-of-tune pianos in stimulation bars on the Hamburg waterfront. To get his hands on better instruments, Brahms sometimes practiced in the showrooms of local piano stores. Brahms first caught the public's attention in 1853, when Robert Schumann published a highly laudatory article proclaiming him to be a musical messiah, the heir apparent to Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Brahms, in turn, embraced Robert and his wife, Clara, as his musical mentors. After Robert was confined to a mental institution, Brahms became Clara's confidant, and his respect and affection for her ripened into love, despite the fact that she was 14 years his senior. Whether owing to his unconsummated love for Clara or for other reasons, Brahms remained a bachelor all his life. Disappointed first in love and then in his attempt to gain a conducting position in his native Hamburg, Brahms moved to Vienna in 1862. He supported his modest lifestyle, very un-Wagnerian, he called it, by performing and conducting. His fame as a composer increased dramatically in 1868 with performances of his German Requiem, which was soon sold to amateur choruses around the world. In this same year, he composed what is today perhaps his best-known piece, the simple, yet beautiful art song known among English speakers as Brahms's Lullaby. Honorary degrees from Cambridge University and Breslau University attested to his growing stature. After Wagner's death in 1883, Brahms was generally considered the greatest living German composer. His own death, from liver cancer, came in the spring of 1897. He was buried in the Central Cemetery of Vienna, 30 feet from the graves of Beethoven and Schubert. Download a supplementary listening guide for Brahms, How Lovely is Thy Dwelling Place, from the German Requiem, at the text website. Vienna was a very musical but conservative city, fiercely protective of its rich cultural heritage. That Brahms should choose it as his place of residence is not surprising. Vienna had been the home of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert, and the conservative Brahms found inspiration in the music of these past masters. Again and again, he returned to traditional genres, such as the symphony, concerto, quartet, and sonata, and to conventional forms, such as sonata, allegro and theme and variations. Most telling, Brahms composed no program music. Instead, he chose to write absolute music, chamber sonatas, symphonies, and concertos without narrative or storytelling intent. The music of Brahms unfolds as patterns of pure, abstract sound within the tight confines of traditional forms. Although Brahms could write lovely romantic melodies, he was at heart a contrapuntalist, a developer, in the tradition of Bach and Beethoven. Indeed, he was to be dubbed the last of the famous three Bs, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Figure 32. Brahms's composing room in Vienna. On the wall, looking down on the piano, is a bust of Beethoven. The spirit of Beethoven loomed large over the entire 19th century and over Brahms in particular. The Art Archive Museen der Stadt, Wien. Alfredo Dagliordi. Violin Concerto in D major. In 1870, Brahms wrote, "I shall never compose a symphony. You have no idea how the likes of us feel when we hear the tramp of a giant like him behind us." That giant, of course, was Beethoven, and Brahms, like other 19th century composers, was terrified by the prospect of competing with his revered predecessor. But Brahms did go on to write a symphony, indeed, 4 of them, first performed, in turn, in 1876, 1877, 1883, and 1885. In the midst of this symphonic activity, Brahms also wrote his only violin concerto, which rivals the earlier violin concerto of Beethoven. Download supplementary listening guides for movements from Brahms's Symphonies No. 1, 3, and 4, at the text website. How do you write a concerto for an instrument that you can't play? How do you know how to make the instrument sound good and what to avoid? Brahms, by training a pianist and not a violinist, did as composers before and after him, he turned to a virtuoso on the instrument, in this case, his friend Joseph Joachim. When the concerto was premiered in 1878, Joachim played the solo part while Brahms conducted the orchestra. One technical trick that Joachim surely insisted Brahms employ is the art of playing double stops. Usually, we think of the violin as a monophonic instrument, capable of executing only one line of music. But a good violinist can hold two and sometimes more strings simultaneously and sweep across them with the bow. This imparts a richer, more brilliant sound to the soloist's part. Example 30-1 shows how Brahms incorporates double stops into the melody of the last movement of his concerto. Example 30-1. When he arrived at the finale of his violin concerto, Brahms the conservative turned to a form traditionally used in the last movement of a concerto, the rondo. Recall that a rondo centers on a single theme that serves as a musical refrain. Here the refrain has the flavor of a gypsy tune, like the Hungarian dances Brahms often heard in Viennese cafes as he sipped beer and chatted with friends. What marks this refrain is its lively rhythm. Above this foot-tapping motive, the violin sometimes soars with difficult passage work. The makers of the Academy Award-winning film There Will Be Blood chose this movement by Brahms to serve as the background music, whether to represent the tug-of-war between the greedy oil man and the landowners or simply to have an exciting background score is not clear. Listening exercise 37. Brahms. Violin Concerto in D major. 421-23. 212-14. To take this listening exercise online and receive feedback or email answers to your instructor, go to the text website. We derive our term concerto from the Italian word concertare. A concerto involves a concerted effort, as well as a spirited competition, between a soloist and an orchestra. There is tension between the two forces, though in theory the orchestra is to provide support for the technical display of the soloist. So great were the technical demands placed on the soloist in Brahms's violin concerto that one musician of the day complained that the composer had written a concerto, not for the violin, but against it. To which another virtuoso replied, Brahms's concerto is not against the violin, but for violin against orchestra, and the violin wins. After listening to this movement, give your own opinion as to who wins. At the beginning, the refrain is heard 3 times. In questions 1-3, indicate which is true. 1. First iteration of the refrain A. The orchestra has the refrain, and the violin is silent. B. The violin has the refrain, and the orchestra accompanies. 2. Second iteration of the refrain. A. The orchestra has the refrain, and the violin is silent. B. The violin has the refrain, and the orchestra accompanies. 3. Third iteration of the refrain. A. The orchestra has the refrain, and the violin is silent. B. The violin has the refrain, and the orchestra accompanies. 4. At the end of the transition, what is the relationship between the forces? A. The orchestra has the melody, and the violin plays counterpoint. B. The violin plays runs against pizzicato accompaniment in the orchestra. 5. Now a new theme enters, specifically, a rising scale. Which is true? A. There is a true dialogue here, the violin goes up with the theme, and the orchestra comes down with it. B. Only the orchestra has the theme, going both up and down with it. 6. Again, there is another transition to a new theme. Which is true? A. The orchestra has the melody, and the violin plays counterpoint. B. The violin plays difficult arpeggios to a background accompaniment of simple chords in the orchestra. 7. The refrain returns. Which is true? A. The orchestra has the melody, and the solo violin is silent. B. The solo violin plays the melody in double stops. 8. Now an unusual moment occurs. A. The orchestra plays alone, and the violin gradually sneaks back in. B. The violin plays entirely by itself, and the orchestra gradually sneaks back in. 9. Following the violin cadenza, the refrain is transformed into a march-like melody. Which of the following is true? A. It is played by the orchestra as a single line. B. It is played by the orchestra in double stops. C. It is played by the solo violin as a single line. D. It is played by the solo violin as double stops. 10. Finally, what, in your opinion, is the outcome of this musical context? A. Orchestra is dominant. B. Violin is dominant. C. It's a tie. Gustav Mahler. The history of 19th-century music can be seen as a development of radically different kinds of music: small-scale private music for the home and large-scale public music for the opera house and concert hall. So great was the attraction of the large symphony orchestra, however, that a domestic genre, namely the art song, gradually found its way to the concert hall, thereby producing a hybrid genre, the orchestral song. An orchestral song is an art song in which the full orchestra replaces the piano as the medium of accompaniment. Because a large orchestra can supply more color and add a greater number of contrapuntal lines, the orchestral song grew to be longer, denser, and more complex than the piano-accompanied art song. In a way, the orchestral song provided the best of both worlds, an intimate poem full of romantic sentiment along with a colorful, powerful medium with which to express it. Berlioz, Brahms, and Wagner all experimented with the orchestral lied in various ways. Its greatest exponent, however, was Gustav Mahler, who not only wrote orchestral songs but also brought the orchestral song into the symphony. Figure 33. Gustav Mahler. Copyright Bettman Corbis. Gustav Mahler was born in 1860 into a middle-class Jewish family living in Moravia, now encompassed by the Czech Republic. But as did many other gifted Czechs at that time, Mahler moved to a larger, more cosmopolitan German city to advance his career. At the age of 15, he enrolled in the prestigious Vienna Conservatory of Music, where he studied musical composition and conducting. Mahler felt that his mission in life was to conduct, to interpret, the works of the masters. Like most young conductors, he began his career in provincial towns, gradually working his way to larger and more important musical centers. His itinerary as resident conductor took him, among other places, to Kassel, Prague, Leipzig, Budapest, Hamburg, and finally back to Vienna. In May 1897, Mahler returned triumphantly to his adopted city as director of the Vienna Court Opera, a position Mozart had once coveted. The next year he also assumed directorship of the Vienna Philharmonic, then and now one of the world's great orchestras. But Mahler was a demanding autocrat, a musical tyrant, in search of an artistic ideal. That he drove himself as hard as he pushed others was little comfort to the singers and instrumentalists who had to endure his wrath during rehearsals. After 10 stormy but artistically successful seasons, Mahler was dismissed from the Vienna Opera. About this time, he accepted an offer from New York to take charge of the Metropolitan Opera, and eventually he conducted the New York Philharmonic as well. Here, too, there was both acclaim and controversy. And here, too, at least at the Met, his contract was not renewed after 2 years, though he stayed on longer, until February 1911, with the Philharmonic. He died in Vienna in May 1911 of a lingering streptococcal infection that had attacked his weak heart, a tragic end to an obsessive and somewhat tormented life. Mahler is unique among composers in that he wrote only orchestral songs and symphonies. Songs, however, seem to have come first, both chronologically and psychologically. He began his career as a composer setting various collections of poetry to music, Lieder eins Verendengesellen, Des Nebenwunderhorn, Kindertotenlieder, and the 5 Ruckert songs. Even when he turned to the traditional 4-movement symphony, Mahler did something unusual: he brought the song into the symphony. His collection of single-movement songs served as a musical repository, or vault, to which the composer could return for inspiration while wrestling with the problems of a large, multi-movement work for orchestra. Mahler's First Symphony. though entirely instrumental, makes use of melodies already present in his song Cycle-Lieder eins verenden Gesellen. His second, third, and fourth symphonies incorporate various portions of the Wunderhorn songs as solo vocal parts. Symphonies 5 and 6 are again purely instrumental, but once more borrow pre-existing melodies from earlier songs. Altogether Mahler finished 9 symphonies, 7 of which make use of his own orchestral